Jeremy from jeremy.net. These are thumbnails from an assignment I was working on from a class that I took with architectural illustrator John Messer. The assignment for the class was to design a treehouse. And because I always like to make things 10 times harder on myself, I thought, well, how can I be different? And I decided instead of making a tree house, I decided to make a tree city. I'm always trying to, expand on my ability to draw environments and backgrounds. So this class was a big help. John is a great instructor, and I really enjoyed his class. I learned a tremendous amount from him, and he gave us a lot of resources to continue learning from. Anyway, I chose to do this thing, and the big challenge for me was creating that sense of scale. I switched to layout paper to start blocking this in, or I switched to a layout phase, but I was drawing it on marker paper instead of layout paper, instead of the vellum that I usually use for my layouts, which is more transparent. So the process for this ended up being a little bit different from my regular drawings. However, I think that I prefer drawing on vellum better and being able to flip the drawing directly, because after I did this rough, I basically lay another sheet of marker paper on top and worked through that, and I was able to see through it, but not as well as I normally do. In doing this, even though the tree is an organic form, it's an organic shape, or made up of multiple organic shapes, I still started in with basic boxes, cylinders, and cubes, because I wanted to build this organic shape on top of a structure that felt solid. It's something that I'm always concerned about, is that sense of noodliness in drawing, because through most of my life as an artist, until I really started taking my growth and learning seriously, everything I drew used to feel kind of noodly and wobbly, didn't feel solid. So, obviously taking a class where you're learning about perspective in environment and structure, that helps. Learning those fundamentals of structure visually helps a lot. Now, when I first started drawing this, with a lot of the thumbnails that I showed at the beginning, I tried a few different angles. And the problem I found, normally when you're drawing something, the big thing that helps is comparison. And having a bunch of other items next to it, like a bunch of smaller trees or mountains, so that you can really get a sense of how big this giant tree city is. But I also wanted to have a slight up angle to give it a sense of majesty. And if you're looking at this thing at an up angle, this is the interesting thing about perspective. In order to show something that is truly, truly massive, you have to be very, very far away from it. If this thing is really as big as I'm trying to show it, this camera, realistically, I haven't calculated, but ballpark, you're hundreds of yards away. I don't know if you'd be a mile away from the tree taking that image, but you're pretty far away from it while you're taking that image. And from that point, the farther away you are from it, the effects of perspective are minimized. I'm not sure if I have the vocabulary to describe it properly in a way that everyone will understand it. I think some people might understand the idea of using a telephoto lens versus a wide-angle lens. How when you're using a wide-angle lens, everything is fisheye, but with a telephoto, it's a long lens, so you don't get as much of that distortion at the edges. Or just the idea of, like, if you're looking at an object and the vanishing points are really, really far away from the picture plane, so that the distortion, that sense of angle, that dramatic image you get is minimized. But that drama of the vanishing points, of that perspective, that distortion, when used properly, that's one of those things that makes you go, oh wow, this thing is coming right at me, or it's really big. Whereas this thing is not coming right at you. It's really massive and it's really far away. So then the question becomes, well, how do I really convey that sense of scale and that grandeur? And that's where I had the idea of adding the airships. Blimps and dirigibles are objects that most people understand as being significantly large. They're big, massive things. So drawing them as these tiny little things tethered to this tree, and then adding little things like those tiny little elevators, which are really just little boxes, just sliding up and down on a single line. Those were the things that I was using as visual keys to create that sense of scale. Oh, something that I started saying, I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent when I started getting into the perspective thing. With wanting to use an upshot, the thing about it is that the other things you would normally see, mountains and other trees, in order to give you that sense of scale, those things would all be below the picture plane when I'm using this slight up angle. And if I used a down angle, it doesn't necessarily minimize the sense of scale, but I really imagine this is something you were kind of looking up at. You could definitely do a couple of different iterations. And there was an iteration I did of this where it was far enough away that you could actually even see the ground and see all of these tiny things below it. But that one, I felt that it was so far away that you really couldn't put any detail in there. And I wanted to have a little bit of detail, kind of trying to get the idea of this being like a teeming city. And unfortunately, I didn't really plan it out such that I could have a lot of people walking in there. Like there's a little wagon train going up the side of it. But when you can see, when you see how small the physical objects are in here, like people would just be, they would just not even be dots or barely dots. So if I had done something where you were so far away that you could actually see the ground plane of the other things that would give you a sense of comparative scale, those things would also be tiny. So these balloons, the dirigibles, and the elevators, those themselves are acting as proxies for people in sense of how big the people that would be fitting into those things would be. So to see these little things so tiny, that's just minuscule. Or people would be minuscule. And I also put a lot more tone in here than I usually do in a layout drawing. That's because I was kind of cheating in using this almost as a tonal study at the same time. A lot of pieces I would sit down and do a full tonal study as well. But again, being a homework assignment while in the middle of working my day job and still trying to keep working on Morningstar and other art projects, I had to cut a little corners here and there. Now, that isn't to say that you shouldn't use your layout drawings as a tonal study. I think lots of people really, for people who do tonal studies, everyone's got a different method of how they like to do it and what phase of their illustrations they choose to bring them in. For me, I have found that if I separate my phase where I'm doing my line artwork from my tonal study, it kind of makes me go back and then re-evaluate the line drawing and the structure and figure out where exactly do I need to make corrections. Whereas sometimes if you're just focused on doing all of it in one piece, you may say, well, the tonal study kind of came out okay, so I'm fairly happy with this piece. Whereas there may still be some fundamental problems with the drawing that you may not go back and correct. That's it for now. You can check out my website, jeremy.net. That's GERIMI.net. That's where you can buy my comic books and artwork. You can also sign up for my free weekly newsletter to get a behind-the-scenes look at my creative process, updates on new comic books and artwork releases, and upcoming comic book convention appearances. Okay, go be creative.